In 1965, Japan's economy was 30 times the size of South Korea's. That year, Tokyo sent Seoul $500 million in aid and loans, money from a rich country to a poor one. It was more than South Korea's entire national budget. Today, the average worker in Seoul earns more than the average worker in Tokyo. Not the executives, not the top 10%, the average. 30 to 1, erased in one working lifetime. And you're holding the evidence. The memory chips inside your phone come from the country that won. This is the story of how South Korea overtook Japan where it actually counts. In paychecks, in productivity, in purchasing power, without Japan's economy ever technically collapsing. 3 numbers explain the whole reversal. A wage line that crossed in 2015, a productivity line that is about to cross, and a currency that was pushed down on purpose. The 3rd number is the one almost nobody reads correctly, because the thing Japan did to save itself is the same thing making it poorer against the world every single year. To understand the size of this reversal, you have to understand where Korea started. In 1965, South Korea was one of the poorest countries on earth. Its main exports were textiles, plywood, and wigs made from human hair. Most of the population worked in agriculture. That $500 million from Tokyo, grants and cheap loans settled by treaty, was development money on a national scale. And here's the part that reads like fiction. Korea took a large piece of that Japanese money and poured it into a steel mill on the southeastern coast. That mill became POSCO, today one of the largest steel makers on the planet. Steel became ships. Hyundai cut its first shipyard into a beach in the early 70s, and Korea went on to dominate global shipbuilding. Ships became cars, cars became semiconductors. One rung at a time for 60 years, Korea climbed the ladder Japan had climbed, except it never stopped climbing. If you want more breakdowns of how economies actually change places, not the headlines, the machinery, hit the like button. It genuinely helps. And subscribe. We publish multiple times a week. Here's the engine most coverage misses. It isn't just that Korea grew, it's what Korea did with the growth. Think of a company's productivity like a bakery that learns to bake twice as many loaves per hour. There are 2 things you can do with that: cut prices to defend market share, or raise the baker's pay. For 30 years, Korea raised the baker's pay. Between 1990 and 2020, real wages in South Korea roughly doubled. In Japan, over the same 30 years, real wages barely moved at all. Around 2015, the 2 lines crossed. On OECD purchasing power numbers, the average Korean worker began out-earning the average Japanese worker, and the gap has widened every year since. The corporate version of this same story. In 1999, Sony alone was worth more on the stock market than every listed company in South Korea combined. By 2002, Samsung had passed Sony's market value. It never looked back. And in 2018, on purchasing power alone, Korea's GDP per person passed Japan's. The country that received the aid now produces more per person than the country that sent it. So what happened on the other side of the strait? Japan didn't collapse. Japan made a trade. When the bubble burst in the early 90s, Japanese companies chose to protect jobs instead of pay. Lifetime employment survived, wages froze, deflation set in, and for a generation, a raise became something your father remembered. The productivity number tells you what that cost. In 1997, Japanese output per work hour peaked at about 71% of America's. It has since fallen back into the low 60s. Korea, meanwhile, kept converging and is now within a few points of Japan, closing fast. Japan chose employment over wages, Korea chose wages, and made its workers rich enough to notice. Where does the scoreboard stand today? On the rankings that adjust for what money actually buys, the IMF has Korea climbing toward the world's top 12 economies per person by 2030, and Japan sliding down through the 30s. 2 escalators moving in opposite directions in the same building. And the industry of the decade is being built on Korean silicon. The high bandwidth memory stacked inside the AI accelerators running the entire boom comes overwhelmingly from 2 companies, SK Hynix and Samsung, both Korean. We covered the one machine every chipmaker depends on in our ASML video. It's linked above. Korea buys those machines by the fleet. Japan, which once owned the memory chip industry outright, is now spending public money and subsidizing a Taiwanese company to build fabs on Japanese soil, to claw back a position it invented. And now the currency. In 2024, the yen fell to its weakest level against the dollar since 1990. That was not entirely on accident. A cheap yen is how Japan kept its exporters alive through the lost decades. And it's the same cheap money that powers the carry trade we broke down in the yen carry trade video, also linked above. But a currency is a price tag on a country's labor. Push it down for long enough and something strange begins to happen. Japanese workers become some of the cheapest skilled labor in the developed world. Factories are now moving into Japan the way they once moved into Korea, partly because Japanese labor has become a bargain. Read that again from Seoul's side of the water. Every year the yen stays down. The dollar scoreboard moves further towards Korea, measured in the world's money. Japan votes against itself. Now, here is what the Japanese side of this argument will say, and they'll have receipts. First, the measure. Korea's lead is on purchasing power and wages. In raw dollar terms, the race is a photo finish, and if the yen recovers, Japan retakes the nominal lead overnight. Same countries, different ruler, different winner. Second, wealth. Income is a flow. Wealth is a stock. Japanese households sit on decades of accumulated savings that Korean households, carrying some of the heaviest household debt in the developed world, simply don't have. Third, the mirror. Korea is running Japan's exact playbook. Export champions, an aging society, with a birth rate near 0.75, the lowest any country has ever recorded. Korea isn't exactly escaping Japan's future, it may be speedrunning it. All of that is true, and none of it changes the verdict on the scoreboard a worker actually lives on, the paycheck. On wages, Korea passed Japan a decade ago. The gap is still widening. Here's the number. In 1965, 30-1, Japan. In 2026, the average South Korean out-earns the average Japanese, and the country that sent the aid now applies for factories from the country that received it. And here's why this reaches you, dear viewer. If you hold a developed markets index fund, Japan is probably your largest holding after the United States. Korea, in most index families, is still filed under emerging markets. Sit with that. The index industry classifies the country with the higher paid workers as emerging, and the one with 30 years of frozen wages as developed. Your portfolio is quietly betting on yesterday's map. The system simply stated, Korea converted productivity into wages and kept climbing the ladder. Japan, on the other hand, converted productivity into job security and a cheap currency, and the cheap currency is now repricing its entire workforce downward against the world. Now, the variable to watch out for is the yen. If it strengthens hard, the dollar scoreboard flips back and the headlines will call it a Japanese comeback. It won't be one. Watch the wage lines, not the currency. The wage lines don't care about the exchange rate, and they haven't crossed back. Now, if this changed how you read the next headline about Japan or Korea, be sure to hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it's the single biggest thing that pushes this to more people. And don't forget to subscribe. We publish multiple times a week. And settle on something in the comments. Which scoreboard counts to you? The paycheck or the balance sheet? Korean and Japanese viewers especially, let us know. We read everything.